Yeah. Do you want me to, do I need to like call?
We need to call.
We're gonna.
A little bit loud. Sorry.
That's my fault.
It's probably because the microphone is out front. It's just listen to steam.
Oh, all right, sorry. Okay, so it's, thank you, 5:07. We're going to call the Hamilton Board of Education preliminary budget hearing to order. And turn it directly over to Matt.
Thank you. Starting lineups.
Starting lineups.
Thanks, Steph. Welcome. A couple somewhat new faces here this year anyway, as far as our budget proceedings. So Corey, very welcome. Glad you're here. My team, I'm happy to see you here too, and the board members, of course. So, just to give you a quick, this should be fairly straightforward. I'm going to walk through a brief presentation. Much of it will be sort of a review of things that have been covered along the way, both at board meetings and at previous budget coffees or budget meetings. And then, if all goes well, then the board will be acting on our adopting our 2018-19 budget for next year, and then also approving our district property tax report card, which is required to be submitted to SED within 24 hours of the adoption of the budget. So that's sort of the next timeline for the next couple of minutes. So in general, in terms of the budget process this year, it's been pretty straightforward. I'm going to get into the details in a minute, but we are happy to report that we have a budget. I have a budget presenting to you tonight that basically maintains all of our current program and staffing that's in place this current 2017-18 school year. So that's good news.
Can I stop you? I lost my copy. I have another copy of this.
Oh, here, I got one.
I'm sorry. No, not that, but sorry.
That's all right. I'm not going to get to that till later.
Okay.
So starting with the tax cap, and again, really the first step that we have to complete in the budget development process going back into February, and actually by March 1st, is the calculation of our district's allowable tax levy increase under the New York State tax cap, the tax law. You'll see in a minute, it's hard to believe, this will be our 7th year under the tax cap, which doesn't seem possible. I mean, it does go by quickly. It still seems like a relatively new initiative in New York State, but 1890 will be our 7th year under the new tax cap. Our calculation, without getting into too much detail, for next year is 2.89%. So that's the allowable levy increase. Our current levy is about $7.1 million. So we can levy taxes about $7.3 million, a 2.89% increase, requiring a simple majority vote from our voters in May. That's based on a couple of factors that really are higher than what they've been in the last couple of years. First is our tax-based growth. This is specific to Hamilton Central School District. This accounts for any new brick and mortar development additions to the tax roll. So this is not changes in assessments, increase in assessed values. This is actually new taxable properties in the district. And then the next piece is really, this is the first time in years we've seen this number at 2%. The statewide consumer price index average is greater than 2%. I think it was 2.13%. So in the calculations, all districts across the state use the lesser of 2% or the statewide CPI. We've had, in recent years, we've been as low as I think 0.25%. This is the first time in years that we've seen the economic growth around the state in excess of 2%. So that's a good thing. This is often why, still, even after 7 years, the tax cap is commonly referred to as a 2% tax cap. This is why, because of this 2% factor. And then, basically, so using 2% as a baseline, adding in the tax-based growth, and then adding in the exclusions, and in this case for us, it's our capital levy exclusions, the local share of any tax dollars to support capital improvements. So that's our debt service and our bus purchases. And the reasons these are excluded is because these are separate referenda that are passed by voters, so that local share has been approved by vote, so that's excluded from the calculation. There's no exemption for TRS, ERS, and no change in pilots, which are payments in lieu of taxes. Last year, we had to add in a new pilot for good nature, but that's sort of stabilized. So just to look back at the last 7 or 8 years or so, starting most recently with a 2.89% proposed levy increase, you can see the last 7 years under the tax cap, we've had one case where we did an override, 2015-16. That year was really an anomaly. We had an allowable increase that was actually negative. That makes sense. The increase that was negative. So that was a year that the board and myself and our team felt that that was the year to go out with an override. It was right in the thick of the GEA, the gap elimination adjustment, when there was that aid reduction to schools. So that was the time that it was really needed. You can see the rest of them have been tax cap compliant. 2013-14, also a little bit of an outlier, 4.5%. That was the year the contributions in New York State teachers' retirement system, the retirement contributions from the employers, was a significant increase. So there was an added exemption there. You see last year we were just at 1%, and that was due to the statewide CPI being fairly low. So again, we've been, intentionally, we've had modest, moderate increases each year, really trying to stabilize things.
Are we compliant with the 2.89?
Yes, the budget that I'm going to present, the detail that I'm presenting, and the budget ultimately to be adopted is compliant with 2.89. Yep, right at the limit. Our last budget coffee, really April 1st is the deadline for the New York State budget. Really, Governor Cuomo's made a real effort to have on-time state budgets. And ultimately, what ends up happening is we don't hear much until about March 28th. And then everybody scrambles, and people that matter and all, they end up in a room together, and these things get knocked out. So a couple of things. And you hear the spin on this in the media. You'll hear broad generalizations in terms of education funding, but I thought it'd be important to go through some of these things and talk about, unfortunately, how most of them won't impact HCS. When we talk about a total education funding increase of nearly $1 billion, that's statewide, and that covers all education spending. So foundation, I think about 2/3 of that is actual increases in foundation aid, which is really the general operating aid for school districts. The big thing that I took out of this budget was expense-based aids being fully funded and rejecting the governor's proposal to cap these aids moving forward starting in 1920. So these are expenditure-based aids, categorical aids like building aid, BOCES aid, high-cost aid for special ed education students. For a small district that relies heavily on BOCES services, with a capital project booming, this could have been problematic for us moving forward. So we hope that doesn't happen. I'm thrilled that this is kind of thrown out. As far as new statewide initiatives, new district reporting on spending, I think there's 75 or so districts that are going to have to report building level expenditures. And I think the main target of this is for larger school districts with multiple buildings to ensure equity in terms of spending within school districts. Eventually, within probably 3 or 4 years, all districts are going to have to do this. As a K-12 building, I'm not real concerned about this. I feel we're pretty transparent to begin with and how we're spending our money, so not of much concern at this point. The first 1,000 days of life is a new initiative to target young students within the first 1,000 days after they're born, which is wonderful. However, it's going to target areas and students that are enrolled in Medicaid, which our population is relatively low. So the chance of that impacting us is slim. Community schools funding, that's an existing initiative, statewide community schools program. We are not a recipient of that. It's higher need districts. We do have some of our neighbors that receive small amounts. It's just a continuation and added funding into that program. Does not impact us. Expanded access to pre-K. I know here there's been some conversation about full day pre-K. we do currently have an extended day pre-K 2 days a week that we fund ourselves. About 2/3 of the districts in New York State currently have pre-K. So there's about 1/3 of the schools in the state that don't have pre-K at all. Believe it or not, there's still a couple, I think 24 or so schools that don't even have full-day kindergarten yet. So, unfortunately, I believe that when the state talks about expanded access to pre-K, districts that don't have pre-K are certainly going to be targeted before districts that have half-day looking to convert to full-day. So, again, that's probably limited impact, if any, on us. And then the after-school program is a statewide after-school initiative targeting districts with high rates of homelessness. So again, not something that we are likely to benefit from. Our homelessness is virtually zero, which is a great thing. So the reason I mention those is going back to the top, when we talk about $1 billion increase to statewide education funding, that includes all the funding for those initiatives. So it sounds like a big dollar amount when you spread it out over 700 or so school districts, and then all these special initiatives, it's not quite what it seems. The last piece here, and for those of you that came to the coffees or met with me, this was the one thing I was really curious to find more about. And this was this idea of the boards having the authority to create local charitable education funds at the local level to help taxpayers offset the impact of the new federal tax plan. So the new federal tax plan limits the SALT deduction, state and local taxes, to $10,000. Yes, is that somewhat, I think everybody's somewhat familiar with that. So ultimately what it would do is that you create this education fund, and what I was curious as to whether or not this would be an additional source of revenue to the district. And what I found out yesterday from, I had a meeting with other business officials, we had a CPA present, and the answer to that last bullet is no. It's no additional revenue. And from what I learned yesterday, I would be very surprised, and the CPA concurred, if in New York State this ends up being rolled out as the politicians intended to. Basically how it would work is, if the fund is established, taxpayers can make a contribution up to 95% of their tax bill to this fund. So let's take somebody had a school tax bill of $3,000. They could pay up to $2,850, 95% of that, into this fund. We as the district would give them a certificate or a receipt, or just like you would if you give a donation to the American Red Cross for that $2,850. Then come tax time, they have to pay the remaining balance of $150 to the school. We as a school have to move that money from the charitable fund over. There's questions as to how the accounting would work. Debbie's cringing, and I knew she would. That was their tax collector, she's cringing. There's questions remaining of the accounting. And then basically $2,850 of that $3,000 the taxpayer could recognize as a charitable contribution. It's a scam. I mean, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like that, if it is a tax, you pay it as a tax, it's a tax. So the IRS hasn't really weighed in on this yet. I know California's trying to do something similar. They've got the wheels turning. I would be really surprised. So this is strictly a benefit to individual taxpayers, no benefit to the district, no direct benefit. I mean, I guess sort of in an indirect way it could help you in other ways. But in terms of an additional source of revenue to the district, it's not. I was hopeful that, I was under the impression that there may be, take for example that $3,000 tax bill, the ultimate amount that the person would pay would be more than $3,000, but the tax benefit would reduce their net impact to below $3,000, and we would have revenue in more than $3,000, but that's not the case. They're going to make a contribution. We're basically holding the money, and then they're paying the difference at tax time. So Still a lot of questions. I don't know how the board creates it, what they have to do to create it, but again, I would, and I'm echoing the thoughts of a CPA, Pat Powers, so one that we've worked with for years. He's kind of befuddled by it, so we'll see what happens. So, and I do know that, and Debbie can attest to this, in December we had dozens of calls for people trying to pay their taxes, 2018 taxes early in 2017, in preparation of these the new federal tax code. So because we have property owners here, non-owner occupied housing, camps on Lake Moraine, there are people that do pay in excess of $10,000 in salt taxes. So because of that, it might impact a district like us more than some of our neighbors, but again, I'd be surprised. So let's look at the budget. So 2018 proposed budget. We'll look at the revenues first. And as we always say, there's really two primary sources of revenue. It's our tax levy, which I said is a little over $7 million, and it's our state aid that comes from New York State. That makes up the lion's share of the budget. So under the tax cap, the 2.89% equates to a little over $200,000. Based on the past state budget, 3.78% increase in foundation aid equates to $121,000. So if you add those together, we're talking $325,000 or so, which is good. On a $12.5 million budget, that's better shape than we've been in prior years. Also from the state budget, we're seeing a slight increase in our expense-based aids. These are aids that, think of it as a rebate. You get money in the following year, aid in the following year based on prior year expenditures. So this year, our BOCES aid, we anticipate seeing a little increase in our BOCES aid next year based on current year BOCES expenditures. Two main reasons. Number one is our new technology multi-year that was passed last year. And number two is, as we've been transitioning in different departments, we utilize BOCES FTEs more than usual this year. Network support, CSE, and technology. So we're going to see a little bit of a decrease in our high cost aid. This is much more complicated. It's a multi-year, sort of a moving average based on special ed placements, both in district, out of district, public, private. So we're going to see a slight decrease there. A decrease in non-resident tuition. I should have been more clear with this bullet. But, up until this year, we had special ed students from Stockbridge, primarily Stockbridge, and some of our other neighboring that would send kids to special ed placements here, and that was in the budget for this year. And we don't, as of now, we don't have that student anymore, and we don't anticipate them or any non-residents in our special ed classrooms for next year. And then the last thing, and we're going to talk about this on the property tax report card because we now have to document this and share this and be very transparent, is we're going to increase some of our the use of some of our reserve funds. We're going to transfer in some money, and this was really done sort of at the end of the line to make things balanced. So we'll get into a little bit that one more in a few minutes. On the expenditure side, and again, at the coffees, at previous meetings, about 70% of our budget, $12.5 million, is people. Okay, it's salary and benefits, and that's ultimately what our programs boil down to. Now, I need to make something real clear here, and when we talk about the 2018-19 proposal with this staffing, we talk about additions. These are additions being added from what was budgeted for this current 17-18 school year. Okay? So it's additions based on the current year budget, and in most cases it's maintaining what's currently in place. So it's an addition of a 0.5 FTE in art. So the budget for this current year was for 1.5 FTEs of art. We're currently at 2.0 FTEs. So from budget to budget, it's an increase of that half-time art teacher, an increase of 0.4 FTE social studies. The next two are related directly to student services. And either IEPs or 504 plans through the CSE. A 0.2 FTE, when we say 0.2 FTE, FTE is a full-time equivalent. So a full-time person is a 1.0. So a 0.2 person could be 20%. So that in most cases that's 1 day a week, or the equivalent of 1 day a week throughout the school year. So for ELL services, these are kids in our district where English is not their primary spoken language, and we have to provide English language learners services provided from a BOCES itinerant in district to those students. Same thing with speech, the 0.2 FTE. We have one full-time speech therapist that we hire, that we employ here at the district. That's not enough to cover the needs of our need and the demands out of the CSE for speech services for the district. So again, that's a 0.2 FTE for BOCES. Okay. The last one is the addition of summer programs into our budget. We've had, for a number of years, we've had summer academy, middle school summer academy, and an elementary targeted summer academy and elementary for, I think, is it 4 weeks, elementary? Historically, these have been funded through grant proposals through the McNeese Foundation and Hamilton Emerald Foundation. This year, they're being included in the budget. So in terms of program that's being added into the budget, you can see there's a list of 4 or 5 things that are being added. Now, again, it's sort of status quo because these things have been added for various reasons throughout this current year, but from a budgetary standpoint, these are additions. Special education, and the next 2 bullets have been the 2 biggest cost drivers if you look at our budgets over the last 5 to 7 years. The biggest cost drivers have been special ed and employee benefits. Special education, projecting, looking at next year, is actually the smallest increase, a little less than 1%, that we've seen in years. And that's due to some students that are going to be coming back to self-contained classrooms within the district, as opposed to being at an outside placement such as a BOCES special ed placement. So, you know, we're able, if we have an existing classroom here and a program that exists here for students, rather than paying the tuition for them to go out to an outside placement, there's a cost savings recognized there. So, and then lastly, employee benefits. As an employer, the district has to make contributions to the teachers' retirement system and the employees, the local retirement system. It's a percentage of member salaries, so we have to pay a percentage of what our employees make to the retirement system. Yesterday, I did hear, and this is, you kind of scratch your head at this, there's 3 ways the retirement systems are funded. One is through employer contributions, employee contributions, which are defined by statute. So depending on what tier you come into the retirement system, you give a certain percent of your wages for a certain number of years. And then the third one is in the market. I think it was TRS had a great year. The numbers just came out for their year end of 2017, and I don't want to say it, but they did quite well. So hopefully, even though our contribution, the rate is increasing this year, I'm hoping that means next year we might see a little reprieve because they had a great 2017 in the market. So, and then lastly, probably most importantly in terms of employee benefits, are health insurance premiums. You know, a 6% increase in premium, which is pretty good. We're in a consortium with 11 other school districts in the Mid-New York library system. Our premium increases the last 5 to 7 years have been anywhere from 2.5% to 8.5%, which really is, you know, for those of you that have spouses or yourself work in another setting, I think that's pretty good considering the level of benefit that we have. But it's expensive, and then that 6% increase in terms of the actual budget line amounts to about $160,000. So if you go back to the previous slide with the revenue, we talk about the $325,000 from our 2 main revenue sources. the health insurance alone eats up about half of that. So it kind of puts things in perspective. So another thing that's happened over the years, and this is sort of a little bit of an aside, but when we have alternative funding sources that dwindle, in order to maintain the programs that those are used for, it puts an added burden on the general fund or the budget. So if you look here, these are Title I and Title IIA funds. And these are funds that are under formerly No Child Left Behind and now the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA. It's in the news constantly. You can see what's happened. Title IA is for students in poverty, AIS services. You can see what's happened to our allocation over the years. Title IIA is for teacher improvement. You can see that sort of stayed steady for a few years, and then we got a big reduction this year. We don't have our allocations yet for next year, but we can certainly look at the trend and get a pretty good clue of what's going to happen. But if you look at Title I, for example, as recently as 13-14, that allocation is enough to fund 2 AIS specialists in the district to provide those services. 17-18 is essentially 1. So in order to maintain that level of staffing, that shifts the burden of a full FTE from these federal funds over to the general fund. So, this is just an example of what can happen. Now, anybody in this district can tell you, we certainly don't have, especially in Title I, where our kids in poverty, our free and reduced lunch rate has gone up during this time. We certainly have equal, if not more, amount of student needs, but the allocation's gone down. So it's just this is just a visual to show how other sources of funding can impact the general fund. So the budget overview, and I know I'm going to quote Harry. This presentation is sort of the beginning of the death by PowerPoint when it comes to Matt standing up and talking. At our budget hearing, which is on May 8th, we send out the newsletter, the budget notice, then we have the budget hearing on May 8th. That's when I really get into the nuts and bolts of what's in the program, the administration, and capital. This format, this three-part format, is a required format by the state that we have to report our budget on in these 3 components. And nothing here is out of the ordinary. If you look at any school district in the state, you're going to see probably 75% of the expenditures are in program, and then the rest split up between administration and capital. So you can see it turned out to be a 3% increase in spending, total budget, just under $13 million. And you can see that it's the most significant in the program line, and again, that's largely due to those additions of the FTEs in the summer program. So it's addition of those staffing that wasn't in the budget for 17-18. And then the rest of it, most of the increase is just the employee benefits. I think the total pool of employee benefits is a little over 5%. And then most of that is allocated to the program, where most people are. And then a portion of it is, I think, 6.5%. It's not an exact science, but for consistency purposes, 6.5 of it to the administration, 6.5 to capital. So that's what those increases are largely due to. And again, we were able to accomplish that, a 3% budgetary increase, while staying within the 2.89% tax limit. So those are the figures. That's the budget. Before we get into the report card and then we have time, I can open up for some questions. I just want to go through the remaining timeline. And I did this before. We use some more things, so I can update it as I go through. So the property tax report card, we're required as a district to submit this. The board has to approve it. We have to submit that within 24 hours of adoption of the budget. So that'll go in once the budget is adopted. May 8th, 6 o'clock, the public budget hearing. It's similar to this, except that it's a lot more detail on the budget. And then at 7 o'clock, meet the candidates night, and we do have 2 board petitions for the 1 seat, so we will have meet the candidates night at 7 o'clock. So it is necessary. May 10th, our senior citizens breakfast here at school at 8:30, and then May 15th, Tuesday, May 15th is the statewide budget vote. So that's kind of the remaining timeline. We'll have more posted on the website pertaining to each of these individual events, and we'll go from there. The report card. Sure.
I just want to make sure I understood one thing you said earlier, because it's the most likely thing to be asked of us. The staffing, the addition to the halftime art, .4, social studies, et cetera, those are staffing levels that we already have, but that were added to this year after last year's budget, so that those additions mean that we are maintaining staffing exactly as it presently is.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep.
You were clear.
Good.
Except, but it's not for the yellow services or the speech, those are increases.
So art
Art and social
There are,
studies.
in terms of the budgetary impact, they're all increases. But we've had to increase to the FTEs during this year too.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it's exactly .2 or when
Okay.
it happened, but yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So for the board members, the property tax report, and I had an awful time with this today. I had it filled out. You have to do it in a portal. And I was waiting to print it in case there were any changes, anything came up. And then, if you saw my email, I'm sure there's 680 other business officials doing the same thing today. Portal crash. So all I had was a template. So I had to do it by hand. And that's what you have today. So this is ultimately what's going to be entered into the form and submitted. So this is the front page is the standard format. This is where we have to report. The top half is sort of for tax cap purposes. If you see a negative number in there, that means you're doing an override. You'll see the percent increases. You have to project what your fund balances will be at the end of the year. We're within that statutory 4% limit. And then on the back is a new piece that, in an effort to increase transparency in reporting, these numbers are available. They're public figures, either in your audited financials or in the ST3. This is just another avenue of people having access to this information. Districts' reserve funds, what their balances are and what their intended use of those reserve funds is moving forward. So it's sort of a snapshot on March 31st, what you project the balances to be at the end of the year, and then your intended use moving forward. So really, I talked earlier about using $60,000 of reserves. You're not going to see this on here because on June 30th, we're still in the current year. That transfer into the general fund from reserve won't happen until after June 30th. So it's our unemployment reserve that we're going to be utilizing. It's not something we've done. It's not something I'm crazy about doing. It's going to could create a problem next year. You put that into the budget, you don't have that as a source of revenue next year. But that's what was needed in order to balance things for this year, to keep things in place. So this, again, it's just increased transparency, new way of reporting, and this is submitted to NCD tomorrow.
So on here it says the 331 balance.
Yep.
And then an estimated 631 balance.
Yep.
It looks like it's the same number.
That's how much interest we think we're going to earn on that big chunk of money in the next 4 months.
Oh, okay, that's it.
Not much. Not enough to pay for Bill's coffee.
Okay.
And that's, I joke, but it is, if you look at that, if we anticipate having any other fund balance, we'll probably put it into our EBLR, which is our employee benefit accrued liability, which is compensated absences when people retire. But if you look at the other ones, you see slight differences. That's projected interest rate. I mean, interest revenues virtually non-existent these days, which is too bad. But that's what those slight differences would be to. Yeah. That's a good question. Do you guys have any questions? So if you want to, I don't know how you want to do this, if you want to take action, if you're prepared to do that, I know we have a couple of community members here, we can certainly discuss further, answer any other questions, we can do that.
So do I need to, we need to,
Yeah.
okay, and then we can discuss?
Sure.
Discuss them further, okay. So I need a motion to adopt the 2018-19 proposed budget with an expenditure plan not to exceed $12,958,886, which includes all projected OC services, and to approve a bus proposition for 2 passenger buses at an estimated maximum cost of $180,000.
Moved.
Second.
Okay? Any discussion? Paul, you just walked in. All in favor?
Aye.
I'm going to abstain just because I just got it.
Okay.
And I, for the record, I met with Ellen, I don't know if she communicated this to you, but I met with Ellen yesterday.
You know, and then I do the tax report, that's the stuff that we just, we should have that. I need a motion to approve the property tax report card. The purpose of the report card is to ensure that each district clearly communicates the proposed budget and tax implications.
So moved.
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay, and we'll move to item 3.0 for community participation.
Thank you. So anybody, questions? No? Thank you. Thank you guys.
There you go.
I got one. I think I might know the answer to this, but what did the elementary school get and what did the high school get as far as either staffing or big picture?
Well, I'll go through these. I mean,
saw
basically,
it,
the budget in general is basically status quo.
Yeah.
It maintains all the current programs that exist today, is being offered in the building. So, and I was, Harry, I think I was clear. I'm going to say it again. Hopefully I say it as clearly as I did before. When we talk about these additions, these are additions in terms of the budgetary impact. So these are things that were not budgeted for the current 17-18 year, but are being offered currently today. This building. So something happened after last April 10th or whatever it was when the budget was adopted.
Just catching up to reality.
Right. So, but in order to maintain that and to keep that moving forward, it's a budgetary, it's an addition to the budget. So, you know, last year the adopted budget had 1.5 art teachers. You know, had 1 full-time and 1 half-time. We now have 2 full-time art teachers. So moving forward. Now, as far as that 0.5, if it's elementary, secondary, I would defer to the principals on that. I'll go back to Bill in a second if he wants to answer that. The social studies, again, it was 0.6 FTE, but now they've been increased to full-time. It's not, I believe, jump up if I'm wrong, but it's not strictly social studies. There's some reading and some specialized reading instruction that's involved as well. That's what led to that being increased. The FTEs for ELL services and speech services, those are itinerants that visit us from BOCES 1 day a week to provide additional ELL services and speech services to students based on IEP's 504 plans through the CSC. And then lastly, the summer programs were funded in recent years through grant monies through the McNeese Foundation and the Emerald Foundation. They've been added into the budget, I believe, for the summer of 2018. I don't know, Bill, because I don't know if you can comment in terms of, you know, to me, you know, we're a K-12 building, so I really try to separate my, you know, it's not about giving elementary something.
And last year, elementary got a full-time position too, so I can see that.
Right. Yeah, that's sort of in my world. That's not the way it's considered.
Right. But looking at that paper, I was just curious how it played out as well.
Yeah. And again, I don't know if these additional services are elementary kids, secondary kids. I'm not sure. But it addresses the needs of all of our kids.
So has, in a matter of 2 years, the art program gone from like a .7 position to a 2 full-time position?
Yeah.
That's great.
Our numbers have increased drastically.
As far as
Yep.
enrollment in classes? Or?
So now we're offering a pre-engineering and DEP program at the secondary level through the elective fair. There's 18 students signed up for that. Studio 3 numbers are large now, so the art program has blossomed.
Okay.
So we want to meet the needs of all those kids that are interested in that program.
Yeah, that's great. I just wanted to better understand.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
And you know, I'll just make one more comment. When we, you know, we're, as a district, our hands are tied to this process of when the budget vote is. I've said this before, we have to work backwards off May 15th. You know, we have to have this meeting tonight because we have to have what you took action on submitted by Monday. What the board adopts is the spending plan of the $12.9 million. And as you saw here with these FTEs, a lot changes. I mean, a lot is going to change between now and next June 30th, which is the budget. You know, the good, the bad, you know, netting each other out. So there will be the whole while the process of adopting the budget and voting on the budget is very much set in stone, the budget itself is very fluid. And as you see, when we do appointments at board meetings and increasing, decreasing services, it's very fluid throughout the next 15 months of really what was just active. So, you know, it's becoming a lengthier process. You know, it seems like every year we start this earlier in the fall, October, November, with the uncertainty, and we work through it. Tax cap through February, and then awaiting the state budget. It is pretty lengthy, but we'll be doing it again for 1920 before we know it. So, thank you for those of you that participated, and you know, again, I encourage you to, as we do these things in the future, to attend and participate, and offer feedback. It's all very helpful. Thank you. So you're gonna.
I have to adjourn and then I move to reopen. So I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Sorry.
No.